Hi, welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. Hi, welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. I wanted to go ahead and let you know my sponsor is Midlothian Blade and Barber. These guys are excellent barbers. You could get your complete head shaved. You could get your beard done, straight razor. They are family friendly place. They value the military and law enforcement. Midlothian Blade and Barber, 1000 West Main Street in Midlothian. Senator, today I have Senator Bob Hall of District 2. Senator, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, DV, thank you for having me. This is an honor. I'm glad to be here with you.
Thank you, sir. So I wanted to go ahead. There's been a lot of people moving here, sir. And there's a lot of new people who may not know who Senator Bob Hall is. So I wanted you to go ahead and kind of give a bio on you and how you came to, because I know you were a military man. So I want to know how it went from all that to being a politician, sir.
Well, I tell you, DV, if actually what I should do is begin by raising my right hand and say, my name is Bob, and I'm a recovering political apathetic. And I say that because most of my life, I paid no attention to politics. My wife was fairly active. She would go to meetings and protests and things like that. But I had no interest. I'd vote for the president and about it. I hardly even knew states had government. I was so busy raising a family and running a business that I just didn't get involved. But I also know that who I am. First of all, I'm a constitutional conservative with Judeo-Christian values. I serve my Lord Jesus Christ first, my family second, and the people of Texas are third. I understand that God is in control, and it took me a while to understand that, though, because he messed with my life a number of times along the way and made big changes in it. And he didn't even consult me, not one time did he, but the changes were fairly major. And it took me till well into the middle part of my life to really understand that I best listened to him more closely than what I had been doing. But he started out right out of high school. In high school, because my big plans were to be a hotshot football player. I was captain of the football team, co-captain, same on the basketball team, and I planned to be a hotshot college football player at the University of Florida or Miami or Florida State. And then God changed that. I had a back injury that put me in traction for about 6 months, and that ended my sports career. And so when it came time to graduate and head to college, that senior year, my friends that were a year ahead of me were coming home at Thanksgiving and Christmas. And by Christmas, just about every one of them had flunked out of school, but talked about all the great partying they did at the schools. And I knew that was something that a trap I could not fall into. And so I got an invitation from my good friend that had graduated a year ahead of me. We both played quarterback. He'd gotten a scholarship at a little school in South Carolina called the Citadel. And he invited me up for a weekend. I went up and visited him, and I saw, wow, the discipline there and the nature of the school. I said, maybe this is what I need for a year to get myself grounded. So I thought about it, and I decided what I would do is I would go there for a year, get grounded, and then I would head back to one of the other schools. So I did that, and I tell you, from the day I set foot on the campus of the Citadel, my life changed. The very first thing I was introduced to was a thing they had called the Honor Code. You don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't steal, and you don't tolerate those who do. And it was drummed into us. This was a program that was run by the cadets, not by the faculty, and it was the way you were to live your life there as a cadet, or you would be gone overnight. The second thing I learned was that you never, never, never quit. You might not always win, but you have to get beat. You don't quit. And there were some other things and points of leadership that I learned there that I found very valuable later in life, and had to do with leading teams or being part of a team. And that is, if you don't worry about who's going to get the credit, there is no limit to what a team can accomplish. And if you'll help your teammates achieve their goals first, you'll exceed yours. And so after being there for a year, and that, there was no way I was not going to stay. And so I stayed, and by then I decided I was going to go be a hotshot fighter pilot. And so I was going to be an Air Force cadet. I was a double E major, electrical engineering major. And I pretty much excelled at leadership. I ended up the ranking Air Force cadet in my class. I was captain of the skydiving team. I was on General Mark Clark's advisory committee and a couple other boards in the school. got the award as a cadet, having contributed most of the Citadel in the 4 years I was there. And I was all set to go fly the skies. And I took my last physical and I couldn't pass it. I had 20/25 vision, and they said, "You're not going to fly for this man's Air Force, but you're going to go into the Air Force." So since I was pretty much scheduled to go to flight training, that wasn't going to work. So I had to change my schedule where I'd be assigned. And they asked me, "Well, where would you think if we could get you a spot where you wanted to go?" Because I graduated as a distinguished graduate, so they were going to be trying to find me a good spot. Well, I was raised in Florida. All I've done is for 4 years drive back and forth between Tampa, Florida, and Charleston, South Carolina, pass through Georgia, and that's about all I knew about the states. But I had seen an Annette Funicello movie, and so I said, "Do you think I could get a place in Southern California?" and sure enough, I got an assignment to Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino, California. They sent me to the Minuteman Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Program office, where they were design and development was going place. And so when I arrived there, they looked at me and said, "Lieutenant, what are you doing here?" And I said, "I've got orders to come here." He said, "No, you're a second lieutenant, and we are a very high priority program in DOT, and we only have to accept senior captains with a master's degree in engineering. We don't accept second lieutenant engineers." And I said, "Well, sir, I didn't write these orders. I'm just here." And so they said, "Well, let's see what we can do." So about the next I got really good at shooting pool, because that's where I stayed, over in the officers club, shooting pool, waiting for my next interview with the colonel to see if he was going to give up a slot to this wet behind the ears second lieutenant. And it took about almost 4 weeks, 3.5 weeks for that to happen. But one day I met with a major that'd been traveling a lot and talked to him, and he and I kind of hit it off. We started talking football, and our discussion was around John Hewitt and Joe Namath. John Hewitt had been the Heisman Trophy winner, and Joe Namath, of course, we know what he later became. But he and I agreed that Hewitt better bank his money because Joe Namath was going to make it. So he gave me a job. Actually, he looked at me and said, "Lieutenant, I've got so much work, I'd hire anybody. Take that desk in the corner." And so I did. It turned out to be a really good assignment. Within about 3 years, I had really moved up from that kid that didn't know anything to being the go-to person for solving problems. My training at the Citadel of going after something, not quitting, innovating, adapting, and overcoming challenges. Kind of, but they had a problem, they say, "Well, see Captain Hall or Lieutenant Hall, Captain Hall, see if he can figure it out." And that's how I ended up being the project manager for hardening the Minuteman missile program when they discovered the EMP threat, electromagnetic pulse threat, that we're now so concerned about taking out our electrical grid system. That was my first introduction to it. But I only stayed for a little less than 6 years in the Air Force, got out, went into industry, worked in the aerospace industry for a while, decided that I really, really wanted to have my own business. So I started an engineering consulting business. Did a few other things in business and water sports. We were living at the beach and near the beach in Florida, up in the Panhandle, and had parasail boats and jet skis and beach chairs and pontoon boats and things like that. And then decided that it was time to retire. And so was in the process of retiring in Destin, Florida. I'm sure you've heard of Destin, Florida. May have even been there. A very nice place. I enjoyed working the beach. I was all set to do that. But I had married a Texan. And she handed me a note one day that said, "This is where I'm going to be, in Rockwall, Texas." Turns out the grandkids had shown up, and Texas women are like monarch butterflies. When the grandkids show up, they come home to roost. And so I said, "I think they need grandparents, so let's go do that." Well, the timing couldn't have been better. Again, God's hand stepped in, brought us back there just as the Tea Party was getting started. We found a place in East Texas. My deal that I got out of it was, okay, let's be close to the grandkids, but not real close. And so she agreed if we could be within 45 minutes of there, we could build a house at an air park where I could have my airplane at the house. And so we did. That brought us to Van Zant County near Canton. And soon after getting there, Doc Collins, veterinarian there, held the first Tea Party meeting. And when he held the Tea Party meeting, that kind of tweaked my interest. I thought, gee, by that time I'd gotten a little miffed at George Bush with his TARP program, and I was getting worried about Obama. So I was getting a little bit of an interest in what was going on. So I went to the Tea Party meeting, and at that meeting, it just happened to be, again, God's hand, the timing on this thing, was a man there who was giving a presentation around on a book called The 5,000 Year Leap, written by Cleon Skolson. Are you familiar with that? The book about written and described how this group of old white men, average age 44, some of them weren't even 20 years old, studied 5,000 years of republics, and picked out the best parts from several of them, blended them with biblical principles, and created what I consider to be the second most important document ever written, only right behind the Bible. A little short document that most people don't understand was a simple contract between the people and a group that were going to say, we're going to call it the government. It was the first time in the history of the world the people had decided to pick their leaders, as opposed to the biggest sword and the biggest club being the leader. The people said, we're going to do it, and we're going to carefully divide the power among three different groups there. We're going to have an executive branch to kind of run the show. We're going to have a legislative branch to create the laws, and we're going to have a judicial branch, all different people, to judge whether or not people are living by the law or not. Real simple. And the purpose of government was to protect the people, protect them physically from foreign attacks, and protect them from domestic bad people, and to protect their liberty. And that's what it was about. That's what government was going to do, and let the people continue to enjoy the liberty that had, the spark of liberty that had first been ignited 150 years before that, before the Pilgrims ever got off the Mayflower. They wrote the Mayflower Compact, which said, we're going to America for our religious freedoms, for our liberty to worship our God as we want to. And that was the purpose. And so people for 150 years had lived in liberty, in freedom, without the heavy hand of George, the king. But he'd gotten kind of overbearing, and so that's brought us to the revolution. But that was a story that just got my attention about what we were all about. And then God guided another person in my path that handed me a book about 2 weeks later, written by Tom Brokaw, called The Greatest Generation. And that was a book that was written about my dad, my mom, my grandmother, my granddaddy, my uncles, my aunts. This is the group of people who lived through the Great Depression and took on the two mightiest armies in the world. Most people think we were a big part of the World War II in the beginning. There were 49 other countries engaged in World War II before we entered it. And when we did enter, we weren't the powerhouse. We were ranked 17th in the world in military power. Portugal had a bigger military than what we had. But when we declared war after December 7th, the boys left high school, dropped out of college, stood in long lines to volunteer to go fight. Some went east and some went west. The women came out of their homes, went into the factories and started building planes and tanks and bombs and did things they'd never done before. The country got behind it. And when it was all over with and we had won two big wars almost at the same time, that the biggest that had ever been in the history of the world. And we did not conquer either one of our enemies. What we did was we exported American liberty to the people of those countries. We used our money to rebuild them. We did the sacrifice and said, this is how you need to live. Be able to worship the God of your choice and to live in liberty. And so we did that, and they went back to work. The women, some came out of the factories, went back in the homes like they did before. The men climbed on their tractors or picked up their shovels or their briefcases, and life went on and didn't say much. I was raised by a disabled veteran. My uncle was a POW in Germany, Poland, spent 3 years in a POW camp after getting shot in Italy. My other uncle jumped into Corregidor, was one of the lucky ones. He landed on the island.
Wow.
And so, but they never made a big deal about it. It was just what they did for liberty. And then that generation handed it off to my generation. And that's where God started laying a guilt trip on me. The thought came into my head, and I don't know where it came from. It had to come from him because I didn't think it up. It said that, because when they handed it off to my generation, what did we do? The first thing we did was we kicked God out of the schools. We took the Bibles out of the schools. Teen use of drugs went up. Teen violence went up. Teen pregnancy went up. Divorce rate went up. Debt started to creep up. Inflation started to hit the country, and the family started falling apart. And I realized that my generation was going to be remembered as the first generation of Americans to leave a country worse than what we had inherited it. And that was a super guilt trip. And so rather than continue with our plan of going into the mission fields, which is what my wife Kay and I were going to do, we were qualified with Southern Baptist Disaster Feeding Unit, the Texas Disaster Feeding Unit, and I was a volunteer with Angel Flight, the organization that flies people to medical appointments that can't afford to or should not fly on commercial flights. And that's what we're going to do for mission work. And I got involved in the Tea Party. And when I got involved, it was just like when I was at the Citadel. If I get involved, I'm all in. There's no part-time to it. And so Doc had Tea Party going in the eastern end of Van Zandt County. I started one in the western side of it. We met every 2 weeks. Sometimes we had over 200 people at our meetings every 2 weeks, with great speakers coming in, talking about issues and this and that and the other. And one day I realized that, we, and it wasn't just me, others at the same time, were the issues aren't our problem. It's the people we have in office that's the problem. If we just get the right people in office, we won't have some of these issues. And so we started working. And in 2010, we got about 23 new House reps, changed the House significantly here in Texas. And along the way, I discovered this phenomenon called a state government. I never thought about states having government.
It exists.
Yes, it does. I didn't even thought about it. And so we got busy and worked on that. And then the next election rolled around for 2012. And I was working from 2010 to up to 12, trying to get somebody to run for the Senate seat in our district, because our senator at the time was ranked consistently as the most liberal senator in Texas, right at the deep bottom. And so I tried and nobody would do it. My wife Kay and I, we talked about it, and I said, for a time such as this, if not us, who? If not now, when? We prayed about it. Now, if she were here, she would say, yeah, I was praying, God, don't let him go do this. Please don't let him do this. But we decided to, but God said, you're not quite ready yet. And so he had my opponent pull a really slick trick after 5 o'clock on the last day of being able to file for running. He managed to get me kicked off the ticket at the last minute. It hurt. It was very bad, but as I look back on it, God knew exactly what he was doing, because I wasn't quite ready. But when he got elected, and that was right after redistricting, so they had to draw straws. After redistricting, the senators all get reelected at redistricting, like we're going to do now, and then half of them will only get a 2-year term, and half will get a 4-year term. So they'll draw straws for just 2 years. Well, he got a 2-year term, and so I said, well, we can spend that time getting ready again. And so we did. We hung in there, and decided, yep, we're going to stick with this. We're going to make another run at it. And so we did. And I knew absolutely nothing about really doing a campaign. I'd helped people get elected, but never did it myself. Had no campaign manager, didn't know what to do. So I ordered 3 books from Amazon on how to run a campaign. And God knew that wasn't enough, because, but he did provide me with people at the right time. And what was interesting was a good friend of mine had told me, he says, now, Bob, he says, you're a Christian and you have a good relationship with God. You just need to stay in prayer with him. And when you know you need something, just let him know what you need, and he'll make sure you're taken care of. I know he will do that. Well, DB, the first time I tried to ask him for something, I felt like he slapped me upside the head and said, do you think you're going to tell me what you need? You don't think I know better than you do what you need? And that really brought me to my knees, literally. And so I said, okay, it's in your hands, God. I'm going to make ready the horse for the battle. Duty is mine. Outcome is yours. And so I will rely on you to do that. I said, I will ask you, though, for a couple of things, if you would. I said, along the way, would you just help me say the right thing at the right time? And when it's over, if I don't win, I don't want to be bitter, like I've seen so many other people that ran and didn't win.
I've seen that.
Real bitter. And if I win, I don't want to become arrogant. I don't want to become arrogant. And so in his good humor, he gave us absolutely no money, raised about $16,000 total. But he did give us a lot of good people, and he gave me people right at the right time for what I needed at the time. I was sitting there I just get a couple of examples. I was sitting there trying to contemplate, how do I write a campaign plan? I'm looking at the books and thinking about it. I get a phone call from a fellow by the name of Ken Emanuelson. Ken Emanuelson was one of the originators of the Dallas Tea Party back in the early days. And he called me and said, Bob, He says, what's your campaign plan look like? I said, I don't have one. He says, you need one. He said, you want me to help? You want me to write it for you? And I said, I'd love some help. He says, okay. He told me what to send him, and so did, and he wrote it. About 3 weeks later, I'm at a meeting with a group, and this guy walks up to me, shorter than I am, and he looked at me and he said, his name was Stan. Stan Hall was his name. No relation, never even seen him before. And he said, what's your website look like? What is your website? I laughed. I said, I don't have one. And he said, you want one? He said, I'll make it for you. And so he made me a website. But Davey, that happened time and time again, the people just showing up. And so we knocked on a lot of doors, put out a lot of signs, talked to a lot of people, didn't raise any money, but we did get into the runoff. And out of almost 40,000 votes cast, the incumbent missed winning outright by only 78 votes. 78 votes.
Wow, that was close.
Yes. So he was about 49%. I was at 39%. And I said, well, that's close enough. And so did some other people. All the people that kept saying, well, you're a nice guy. You sound like you might be okay, but you don't stand a chance against an incumbent. All of a sudden, they realize an incumbent in a runoff is seldom wins. Well, but he had a lot of money and he had a lot of lobby support. But then the conservatives got behind me. The conservative organizations like Texans for Fiscal Responsibility and several others there got behind and supported us. And we ended up winning that night. It was an interesting time because I stood at the polls every day from sunup to past sundown. Every day of early voting. And election day, my wife and I were there. We were still talking to people coming out of the polls. They'd already voted. We were still talking to them after 7 o'clock. We got in the car, drove home, kind of laughing about, well, tomorrow maybe we just get in the motor home and we'll head to Florida and get on the beach for a while, or we'll see what we'll do. House was full of people when we got home, waiting there with our orange shirts on, with Right Bob on it. I skipped that part. One of the folks from church, because my opponent kept tagging me as a right wing nut. His name was Bob. It was Bob Duell. It was, and I was Bob. And so he tagged me as a right wing nut. My friend came in one Sunday morning. He says, I saw that. He said, that makes you the right Bob. And I didn't think about it. I thought about it, but the next morning I woke up and I said, that's it. I've been looking for a slogan. So we adopted the slogan, the right Bob. And people still call me when they still say you're the right Bob. But anyway, it jockeyed back and forth at that night, maybe 10 points sometimes, a single point a couple of times, maybe 100 points, but back and forth. But when it was over with, we won by exactly 300 votes. 300 votes out of a little over 30,000. Wow. And my phone rang and people called and said, it's the Gideon win. And if those who recall, Gideon showed up with a little over 30,000 men, and God said, if I let you fight with 30,000, you're going to think you won it. I'm going to let you have 300 so I did it. And so that sealed the deal, because the only promise I made, DV, through the whole thing, because I was learning. I mean, I had the general principles of conservatism. I'd never been in government. I really wasn't sure what all to do in various nations. I just promised the people that I would go to God every day on my knees and ask for his wisdom, his courage, and his strength to know and do his will. And I did. And that's what got me through it in there. Is I just, if I feel I'm right with God with this decision, it's going to be the right answer. And so that's what got me there. And I got a great staff. God bless me. Well, there was a real good conservative in the House that tried to run for the Senate and didn't make it. So his chief of staff was available for a job. And so I got her to come to work for me, which is one of the best things I ever did.
Amy,
yes. Amy, and she, cool. Oh yeah. She's, and then the others that I've had there with Kathy, which has a whole lot of experience in the House with the legislation. So I've been blessed with a good staff and understanding that we are there to serve the people of Texas, that I understand the two roles of an elected official. And not everybody really, I think, truly understands the two major roles. And one of them is the legislature. It is to pass legislation and to stop bad legislation that is counter to our conservative principles. But the other role is, and that you do by being aligned with those who elected you to office. People keep talking about, well, how do you, all the people, they don't agree. They take the abortion issue. Not everybody agrees on it. Well, those that elect me to office agree with the position I took of being pro-life. And they agree with me on pro-religion, on Second Amendment, on the free enterprise, markets, property rights, limited government, those things. And that's how I fight for and against legislation. The other side is the service side. And that's where I deal with everybody. And when I say everybody, it's not just the people in Senate District 2. We will serve anybody who calls our office asking for help in dealing with a state agency. We have so many state agencies that don't know what their job is, or they get enamored with having the power of government and like to wield that power, and will have people do things that are just not doing their job right. So we spend a lot of time helping people maneuver their way through government agencies out there, whether it's CPS or whether it's the workforce or Parks and Wildlife or whatever it is. We're there, for the people, and I don't care who they are. I don't care where they live. I just say, my vote affects you just as much if you live down at South Padre Island as it does right in my district. So if you've got a problem you're not getting solved, and we have the time to do it, we'll do it. And so, the staff I have was fantastic. They showed up every day through COVID. Every day the Capitol was open, they were in their office working, and nobody worried about being vaccinated or wearing a mask or anything like that.
That's commitment.
No, and that's right. That's what makes it work is those. But that's kind of where I came from, who I am, and how I view the world. The first week down there, and it's still, if you ever come by my office, the board is still up there. It became so popular. I said, when I had my first meeting, I said, here's how we're going to evaluate bills. And I wrote down about 6 items that would be the first level of evaluation. Is this constitutional? Is it a core function of government? Does this reduce taxes, or does this reduce or increase regulations? And the very last item on it is this the right thing for moral people to do? And I said, every bill you look at, and you notice I didn't put, was this by a Democrat or a Republican or anybody's name on it? I don't care. I look at bills based on the content of the subject matter of what it's doing. And that's our initial test on whether or not we're going to support it. If it fails at any level along there, then we just can't support it in there. And that has changed a number of the discussions I've had with various people coming into lobby on things, realizing that we have a way of doing business and we're going to stick with it.
Yeah, those core principles are something that are missing in government now. There's a lot of people who don't stick to principle, or they say and don't do.